In the spring of 1980, I was living in Canada while my parents were away. I was in my senior year of high school and staying with my maternal grandparents to take care of them. When the pandemic hit, we decided to leave the city to avoid the risk of them getting infected. Our new home was an isolated house on a river island in the middle of the Padma River. This island was truly isolated. The boomerang-shaped island had two arms. The northwest arm was about 4 miles long and had been above water for about 30 years. That was where we lived. There were a few people living there and some trees. 3 miles to the north was a small village of about 50 people. Everyone there had a boat since the island would be mostly submerged during the monsoon season. The southern arm of the island was 2 miles long, new, and mostly still exposed white sand. It had only formed a year ago, and no one lived there. The house we moved into was an old tin shed built on tall stilts. It was a one-story building and needed significant renovation when we first arrived, but its layout was modern. There were 3 bedrooms, 2 in the south that shared a long balcony, and 1 in the east with a large window. The southern rooms and the east room had attached bathrooms. These rooms were connected to a dining area with a kitchen, a common bathroom, and a window facing north. The door and patio were on the west side. All the doors were made of steel. My grandparents settled in the southern room with the attached bathroom, while I took the eastern room. When we moved in, we had the house repainted and bought a small generator for electricity. My grandfather had suffered a stroke in 2018 and had limited strength on his left side. He could walk, bathe, and use the toilet independently, but he needed help getting dressed and someone to hold his hand when outside. My grandmother's feet swelled painfully if she walked too much. We hired a housekeeper as well, since my high school exams were approaching, and I needed to study. She was a young woman in her mid-20s from the local area, whose husband had left for the city and stopped answering her calls. She had no formal education beyond 5th grade and needed money to support herself. Whatever supernatural forces were attached to the place seemed to target her. She endured the most violent and mentally degrading of the house's supernatural phenomena. She shared these experiences with me because we got along well, being close in age. However, she asked me not to tell anyone, so I will respect her wishes and only share the incidents that I personally experienced. The first night we moved in, my grandparents were already asleep in their room. The housekeeper hadn't arrived yet, and I was struggling to fall asleep in a new place. Around 1 a.m., I heard a noise coming from beneath the house. It sounded like someone was hitting the stilts with sticks. At first, I thought it was just the house settling from the new furniture we had brought in. But the noise was regular, and it sounded like something hitting repeatedly. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside to check, but by the time I reached the stairs, the noise stopped. When I shined the flashlight under the house, there was nothing there. I dismissed it, but that night, it felt like something had shifted in the house. In mid-May, when our housekeeper arrived, I was studying in my room while my grandparents slept. Around 11 p.m., I saw something dark standing in the dining area. For a moment, I thought it was the new housekeeper, but this thing was nearly as tall as the ceiling and as wide as a door. Our housekeeper was tiny and very skinny. When I realized it wasn't her, I looked back at it. The figure moved quickly toward the window, tipping a chair over in the process. The window had bars, so it couldn't just jump out. I rushed into the dining room and turned on the lights, but there was nothing there. The housekeeper came out of her room to check, but I lied and told her I had accidentally knocked over the chair to avoid scaring her on her first night. I still regret that. As time went on, strange things began happening more frequently. Sometimes I would see shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye. I'd hear voices speaking a language I couldn't understand outside, but when I checked, no one was there. Nearly every night, I would hear my name being called from outside. There was an odd sensation of being touched while I was studying or trying to sleep. Sometimes the generator would shut down for no reason, though that was likely just mechanical failure. There wasn't much that was thrown around, but the presence seemed to become more aggressive toward our housekeeper. She heard insulting voices, mocking her life situation. Her food would attract ants if she left it alone for even a few minutes, while the rest of the house had no ant problems. Occasionally, she would feel as though something had pierced her skin, only to find red, swollen spots that looked like scratches. These could have been insect bites, but given the context, I believe they weren't. Once, she got locked in her room from the outside. After that, she didn't feel safe in her room at night and would often try to spend time elsewhere in the house. She couldn't leave because she had nowhere else to go. Nothing much happened with my grandparents. My grandmother, being very religious, believed that her faith in Allah protected them, and it seemed to work for them. But it had no effect on our housekeeper. When the monsoon season arrived in July, the river island flooded completely, with water rising up to the 5th step of the house. Our home was surrounded by rushing water on all sides. My grandparents bought a motorboat to get around. I was the only one who used it because the housekeeper stayed home in case of an emergency. One evening, around 6 p.m., I was bringing groceries and fuel for the generator when some vegetables fell into the water. As I leaned over to grab them, I heard a splash and felt something climb onto the boat. I turned to look, but a chilling sense of wrongness stopped me. Slowly, I turned my head and saw, out of the corner of my eye, something black sitting on the other end of the boat, about 12 feet away. I kept my eyes down, avoiding direct contact, and waited for it to disappear. But it didn't. I couldn't see it clearly, but I had the distinct feeling it was watching me. After a long time, I started the boat motor, hoping moving would make it go away. But it didn't. I managed to steer the boat to the house, jumped off into the water, and climbed the stairs. When I looked back, it was gone. I dragged the boat in and took the groceries and fuel inside. That night, something banged on my window. That shouldn't have been possible because the window was at least 6 feet above the water level. In September 1980. One night around midnight, I found the door to the housekeeper's room open. She wasn't there. I searched the house and found the front door open. Outside, I noticed a trail of flattened grass, as if a large animal had passed through. I followed the trail and found our housekeeper walking alone into the white sand on the southern part of the island, seemingly sleepwalking. When I woke her up, she started crying, saying she didn't want to return to the house. She had left in the clothes she had slept in, and although she hesitated, she came back. But that day, she lay on the floor in my room, unwilling to return to her own. The next day, she resumed her chores as if nothing had happened. Her torment only worsened after that. She took precautions, like bathing in the river instead of in the house and eating her food immediately after cooking. But whatever was in the house seemed to follow her, tormenting her every night. Meanwhile, my grandparents' faith kept them safe, and it even seemed to quiet things down for me temporarily, but it had no effect on her. It was almost as though the housekeeper wasn't there for the shelter or money but to become a target of whatever malevolent force was present. In April 1981, the housekeeper told us she had received news of her husband's whereabouts and decided to leave. After she left, the presence became much less aggressive. Occasionally, I'd still see things from the corner of my eye or feel a strange touch on my arm while sitting at the table. Once, I heard something heavy fall to the ground and rushed to check, thinking one of my grandparents had fallen, but everything was fine. We left the house 4 months later, and I never experienced anything like it again. Though I had some unexplainable experiences after that, they were nothing like what had happened in that house. I randomly saw the housekeeper again in November of last year. We talked, and apparently, the supernatural forces had never followed her. But her life had spiraled down since leaving the house. Now, she can't bear children. I gave her some money before going on with my life. What do you think about this? The house had sat empty ever since my grandpa built it, so there's no history there. The land is also very new. Why would a spirit target a singular person brutally like that?